It's 1963, inside a loud, fluorescent-lit engineering room in Pontiac, Michigan. A group of engineers stands around a workbench, staring at a cast-iron engine block. The room smells like machine oil and cigarette smoke. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Someone has left coffee cups scattered across blueprint tables covered in technical drawings and scribbled calculations. On paper, the engine sitting before them looks small, modest, almost boring, 326 cubic inches. In the middle of the horsepower wars of the 1960s, that displacement figure sounded almost embarrassing. Ford was pushing massive FE big blocks that dominated NASCAR superspeedways. Chevrolet had the legendary 409 that the Beach Boys were literally singing songs about. Chrysler had the terrifying 426 Hemi on the horizon, an engine so dominant it would eventually be banned from certain forms of racing. And Pontiac? They were about to launch an engine that looked ordinary. Nothing special, nothing headline-worthy. Just another corporate V8 designed to meet internal regulations that most customers didn't even know existed. But what almost nobody realized at the time was that this little 326 V8 would quietly change the future of muscle cars forever. Because without it, the Pontiac GTO might never have existed. And the muscle car era as we know it might have looked very different. Most people have no idea how important this engine really was. You think you know the story? Not like this. To understand the Pontiac 326, you have to go back to a moment when General Motors was genuinely terrified of its own success. In 1957, the Automobile Manufacturers Association created an unofficial agreement to stop direct factory involvement in racing. The motivation behind this agreement was surprisingly simple. American cars were getting too fast, too powerful, and too dangerous. And the public backlash was growing louder every year. Newspaper headlines screamed about street racing deaths. Safety advocates demanded government intervention. Insurance companies complained about rising claims. Politicians started asking uncomfortable questions about corporate responsibility. So GM executives, along with other major automakers, made a collective decision. No more racing involvement, no more performance development. And most importantly for our story, engines larger than 330 cubic inches would not be installed in mid-size cars. That seemingly arbitrary rule changed absolutely everything about how Pontiac would approach performance. By the early 1960s, Pontiac was desperate to build something exciting. Their brand image had grown stale compared to the competition. Sales numbers were slipping in key demographic groups. Younger buyers with money to spend were increasingly looking at Ford and Chevrolet instead of considering Pontiac dealerships. The division needed a performance car that could capture imaginations and drive showroom traffic, but there was a serious problem standing in the way. Their biggest and most famous engine was the 389 cubic inch V8. This was a magnificent piece of American engineering. It featured a massive 4.06-inch bore and a 3.75-inch stroke. In high-compression performance form, it produced up to 348 horsepower with Pontiac's famous tri-power carburetor setup. It powered full-size Pontiacs to countless victories and dominated NASCAR racing during the years when factory involvement was technically forbidden, but everyone looked the other way. But according to GM's internal rulebook, the 389 was simply too big for the new mid-size Tempest and LeMans platforms. The corporate mandate was clear: nothing over 330 cubic inches in those smaller cars. Period. No exceptions, no arguments. So Pontiac engineers did something remarkably clever that would have lasting consequences nobody anticipated. They shrank the 389. Instead of designing a completely new engine from scratch, which would have required massive investment, new tooling, and years of development time, they took the existing Pontiac V8 architecture and simply reduced the bore size. The result was the Pontiac 326. Technically speaking, the engine actually displaced 336 cubic inches in its first production form. The math didn't quite work out to exactly 326, but Pontiac intentionally marketed it as a 326 to stay comfortably under GM's 3 to 30 cubic inch performance limit. It was corporate politics cleverly disguised as engineering, and it worked perfectly. The block itself still used Pontiac's traditional architecture that had proven so successful in larger applications. A deep skirt cast iron block that resisted flexing under stress. 5 massive main bearings that distributed crankshaft loads evenly. A rugged forged steel crankshaft designed for durability rather than lightweight. Everything about the bottom end was overbuilt and tough, but the bore was reduced to 3.72 inches while keeping the same 3.75-inch stroke that the 389 used. That smaller bore gave it the 326 designation that satisfied corporate requirements. The compression ratio in early versions sat around 10.51, which was actually quite aggressive for the time and required premium fuel. With a single Carter 4-barrel carburetor feeding the engine, the 326 produced approximately 260 horsepower and 333 pound-feet of torque at the flywheel. Not mind-blowing numbers by any stretch, but strong enough to make the car feel genuinely quick. More importantly than any specification sheet, it fit perfectly inside GM's displacement rules, and that's where things got really interesting. Because Pontiac's chief engineer, John DeLorean, had much bigger plans brewing in his ambitious mind. DeLorean wasn't interested in following corporate rules forever. He wasn't the type of executive who accepted limitations without pushing back. He believed Pontiac needed something bold and dramatic, something that would shake the entire automotive industry out of its conservative slumber. But first, he needed a loophole. And even more importantly, he needed proof of concept. So in 1963, Pontiac officially launched the mid-size Tempest with the 326 V8 as its primary performance option. And buyers absolutely loved it from the first day cars hit dealer lots. The engine was remarkably smooth for a V8 of its era. It idled without the aggressive lope that some performance engines exhibited. It pulled cleanly through the entire RPM range without flat spots or hesitation, and it proved surprisingly reliable even under hard use. With the optional 4-barrel carburetor and a manual transmission, a Tempest equipped with the 326 could run the quarter mile in around 15.8 seconds at roughly 88 miles per hour. For a mid-size family car in 1963, that was genuinely impressive performance. Car magazines took notice. Enthusiast publications praised the combination of refinement and speed. Dealers reported strong customer interest from younger buyers who wanted something more exciting than their parents drove. But Pontiac engineers quickly discovered something else during development and real-world testing. The 326's block design was extremely strong, much stronger than it needed to be for its rated power output. The thick cylinder walls that resulted from the smaller bore meant the engine could easily handle higher compression ratios and more aggressive camshaft profiles without problems. The robust bottom end was nearly identical to the larger 389 engine in terms of strength and durability, which meant the little 326 could take serious abuse without complaint. Push it hard and it just kept running. Rev it past its power peak and it didn't protest. And then the real experiments began behind closed doors. But there was a growing problem. Pontiac's marketing team wanted more power. A lot more. Dealers across the country were asking for something that could compete with the growing performance craze sweeping American youth culture. Ford had the 289 Hypo that was earning respect at drag strips everywhere. Chevrolet was selling increasingly hotter small blocks every single year and stealing market share. The 326 was good, but it wasn't quite enough to generate real excitement, and John DeLorean knew it better than anyone. So behind the scenes, away from corporate oversight, Pontiac engineers started testing the absolute limits of their V8 platform. They experimented with higher compression pistons that pushed ratios toward 11:1 and beyond. They developed more aggressive cam profiles with increased lift and duration. They fitted larger 4-barrel carburetors and experimented with intake manifold designs. Some experimental 326 builds pushed horsepower toward 300, territory that small block competitors couldn't easily match. The results were promising enough to prove the platform's potential, but DeLorean had already realized a deeper truth. The real solution to Pontiac's performance problem wasn't to make the 326 bigger within its displacement constraints. It was to use the 326 as cover for something far more ambitious. Because in 1964, Pontiac engineers secretly began installing the much larger 389 V8 into the mid-sized Tempest platform. That engine used its full 4.06-inch bore and the same 3.75-inch stroke, producing 325 horsepower with a single 4-barrel carburetor, or an absolutely brutal 348 horsepower with Pontiac's famous tri-power setup. 3 carburetors feeding one engine, 3 times the air, 3 times the fuel, 3 times the excitement. The result was absolutely explosive performance that nothing in the midsize segment could touch. But officially, according to corporate rules that still technically applied, Pontiac couldn't sell a midsize car with that engine. So DeLorean and his team packaged it as something different, not a separate model. A special option package, the GTO package. Named after the Ferrari 250 GTO, one of the most legendary sports cars in the world, it was a bold and slightly arrogant choice that perfectly captured the car's ambitions. And just like that, the muscle car era as we know it exploded into existence. But here's the twist that most people completely miss when they tell the GTO origin story. The Pontiac 326 made the GTO possible in ways that went far beyond politics and corporate maneuvering. Without the 326 already installed and proven in the Tempest platform, the larger 389 wouldn't have physically fit so easily into the engine bay. Think about what Pontiac engineers had already accomplished with the 326 program. The engine mounts were already designed and tested for Pontiac's V8 family architecture. The cooling system had already been engineered to handle V8 heat loads in the smaller engine compartment. The front suspension geometry had already been modified to accommodate V8 weight distribution. The driveline components had already been upgraded to handle real torque numbers. The 326 was the test bed for all of this development work, the proof of concept that a V8-powered Tempest could actually work as a coherent package. And once Pontiac proved that the mid-size platform could handle serious V8 power with the 326, the door opened wide for something much more extreme. The engineering was already done. The manufacturing processes were already established. The supplier relationships were already in place. All Pontiac had to do was swap in a bigger engine from the same family. But Pontiac didn't abandon the 326 once the GTO arrived. Far from it. In fact, the engine continued evolving throughout the 1960s as an important part of the Pontiac lineup. By 1965, the 326 received a true 326 cubic inch displacement thanks to a slightly redesigned bore of 3.72 inches, combined with the same 3.75-inch stroke. The previous mathematical fudging was cleaned up, and the engine now actually displaced what its name claimed. 2 main versions were offered to buyers depending on their priorities. A 2-barrel carburetor version prioritized fuel economy and smooth daily driving. This version produced around 250 horsepower at 4,600 RPM and approximately 333 pound-feet of torque at 2,800 RPM. It was the choice for buyers who wanted V8 power without V8 fuel bills or insurance penalties. The more exciting version used a Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor and a higher compression ratio around 10.51. That version produced roughly 285 horsepower at 5,000 RPM and about 344 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 RPM. For a relatively small displacement V8 in the mid-1960s, that was serious muscle that could embarrass much larger engines. cars equipped with the 326 4-barrel could run the quarter mile in the mid-15-second range, with some examples breaking into the 14s depending on gearing, rear axle ratio, and vehicle weight. A well-driven 326 Tempest could humble plenty of cars that cost significantly more money. And reliability? That was absolutely one of the 326's biggest and most important strengths. The Pontiac V8 architecture was famously overbuilt compared to competitors. Thick castings that resisted cracking, strong forged crankshafts that could handle abuse, large cooling passages that prevented overheating even in traffic. Mechanics who worked on these engines often joked that Pontiac V8s were built like farm equipment, and they meant it as a genuine compliment. The 326 could survive sustained high RPM operation that would have destroyed weaker small block engines from other manufacturers. Oil pressure stayed rock stable even under hard acceleration and aggressive driving thanks to Pontiac's robust oiling system design. You could beat on a 326 all day long and it would just keep asking for more. That durability earned the engine a loyal following among buyers who actually drove their cars hard. But the engine's true importance wasn't just about raw performance numbers or durability statistics. It was about accessibility. Not everyone could afford a GTO. By the mid-1960s, insurance companies were starting to pay very close attention to rising horsepower numbers in the muscle car segment. High-performance models were becoming extremely expensive to insure, especially for younger drivers who represented the primary market. A 21-year-old buying a GTO might face insurance premiums that exceeded the monthly car payment. That priced a lot of enthusiasts completely out of the market. But the 326 gave those buyers a middle ground. A Tempest or LeMans equipped with the 326 still felt genuinely fast. It still sounded like a muscle car with that distinctive Pontiac V8 rumble. It still impressed friends and attracted attention, but it didn't carry the same crushing insurance penalties as a big block monster with a GTO badge. Insurance companies classified it differently. Premiums stayed reasonable. Young buyers could actually afford to drive something exciting. And that helped Pontiac sell a tremendous number of cars to customers who might otherwise have bought something boring from a competitor. The 326 expanded Pontiac's market reach in ways that pure horsepower never could have accomplished. By the late 1960s, hundreds of thousands of vehicles had been equipped with the 326 V8 across multiple model years. It powered everything from base Tempests to well-equipped LeMans models. Early Firebirds offered the 326 as their standard V8 option. Even some full-size Pontiacs used the engine for buyers who prioritized fuel economy over maximum performance. The 326 became the backbone of Pontiac's entire lineup during one of the most important decades in the company's history. It was everywhere, and it was making money hand over fist. But eventually, the industry began to change around it. By 1967, Pontiac decided to replace the 326 with a slightly larger engine, the 350 cubic inch V8. The new engine used a larger 3.88-inch bore combined with the same 3.75-inch stroke, offering more power potential while still fitting within the evolving realities of emissions regulations and insurance classification systems. The 350 could make more power while still being classified as a small engine for insurance purposes. It was the logical evolution of everything the 326 had proven. The 326 quietly disappeared from production. Manufacturing tooling was modified or retired. Engineering focus shifted to newer programs, and the spotlight moved on to bigger legends. The Pontiac 400 with its aggressive performance, the Ram Air engines that dominated drag strips, and the monstrous 455 that became synonymous with early 1970s excess. But here's the thing that historians and enthusiasts are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Without the humble 326, none of those legendary engines might have found their way into mid-size muscle cars the same way. The 326 proved that Pontiac's V8 platform could live successfully inside mid-size performance car applications. It helped engineers refine the chassis dynamics, driveline components, and cooling systems needed for high-power applications in smaller packages. It gave Pontiac the confidence to push boundaries that corporate policy said shouldn't be pushed. And it gave John DeLorean the ammunition he needed to convince skeptical executives that bigger engines would work. In a strange way, the 326 was like the quiet architect working behind the scenes of the muscle car revolution. It wasn't the loudest engine in the room. It wasn't the most powerful option on the order sheet. It didn't make magazine covers or inspire songs, but it laid the foundation for absolutely everything that came after. And today, collectors and enthusiasts are starting to appreciate that foundational importance. Cars equipped with original 326 engines are becoming more desirable at auctions and shows, not because they're the fastest or most exciting examples of the era, but because they represent the beginning of something much bigger than themselves. They're the calm before the horsepower storm, the proof of concept that made the storm possible. So the next time someone talks about Pontiac's legendary engines, the brutal 400, the exotic 421, the screaming Ram Air Foo, the torque monster 455, remember the little 326 that most people overlook, because sometimes the most important engine in history isn't the one that made the most horsepower or won the most races. It's the one that quietly made everything else possible. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Pontiac history, let me know in the comments what engine story you want to see next. And make sure to subscribe, because the next forgotten legend might be even crazier than this one.